thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
If there's anything you want to say to start, welcome, and we're excited to start talking to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, I want to keep my statement short because I'd love to just engage
sure,
in a
yeah,
conversation, and apologize if I don't get eye contact with all of you at the same time.
Yeah, I
but,
mean, I got to say, you've got a really good turnout.
This is great. I assume it's just luck and timing, not the quality of the person before you. But no, some of you I've met before, some I haven't. I ran for office first in 1998 for the state senate. I have considered it to be really an honor to represent people. I born and raised in Fairfield 50 years ago. I still live in Fairfield. And so I represent my hometown, part of the 28th district, which is a great honor. And I took on the role as minority leader in 2007 under some unique and unfortunate circumstances. I think that's made me a better leader in some ways, and we can talk about that. And I really thought that's where my public service career was best until we had a change in the governor's race, and the legislature and the executive branch relationship under one-party rule has been very different than it was with split parties. I mean, that's an obvious statement. My opinion is it hasn't worked as well. I think others might disagree with that. But I really decided to run for governor about a year ago, maybe eight to 10 months ago, because I thought that we weren't doing as well as we should as a state, both from a policy standpoint and from a governance standpoint. I believe there's a better vision and a better direction for the state, but I also believe there's a better way to govern. And I've tried to do that throughout my 16 years, whether it's leading on ethics reform, which myself and Senator Ed Meyer, lonely voices in the woods on that issue. We're one of two states that doesn't have, for example, an ethics committee. And there's a better way to govern in terms of how you govern. And I've said at all the meetings I go to, and most of the meetings I go to now are filled with mostly Republicans because that's my target for August 12th. But I tell everybody that, as governor, I want to make sure everybody has a seat at the table. I think it's frustrating that, when Governor Malloy puts together a budget, he doesn't invite Republicans into the room. I don't expect him to take all of our ideas. I would expect him to take a couple. But to not even have us in the room voicing those ideas, I think, is a disservice to the people of the state of Connecticut. So I want to be a different type of governor. I've never put my feet in philosophical cement because I think consensus and compromise are actually signs of strength, not weakness. Sadly, today they're seen as weakness by both political parties. It's not just one. And I think there's a better way to do it. My last comment is part of that is how you campaign as well. And I have said at every meeting that I go to, I'm going to talk about myself, my vision. I will certainly have sharp criticism for the governor's philosophy when I disagree with it, but I'm not going to engage in an intra-party fight on who did what, working for what business, or what happened with other people's backgrounds or lives, because I think people are tired and frustrated of that. And if the only way I could win is by telling people the other guy's worse than me, then I don't want to win. So I guess that's sort of my scattershot thoughts for opening.
Can I challenge you on that last point a little
go ahead.
bit? Because you talk about ethics reform, and thank God somebody should. It seems like whenever that comes up, Republican candidates are only willing to talk about ethics problems in the Democratic Party to score points, and vice versa. And so it's like a mutually assured destruction thing. We had after the whole Donovan mess, right. We had no legislation proposed or whatever. Our paper has made the point a couple times that the Donovan thing was allowed to happen because four people have a lot of power in the waning days of the legislature, including yourself, to kill bills, that have wide support, right, and so forth. So where's the specific proposals that you've done? Right. Where's the criticism of your own party?
Yep. Well, no, and
why is Roland allowed to hang around in the shadows?
Look, I think it's a great question, and I think there are candidly only two people in the legislature who have spoken out on members of both parties, and I think Senator Meyer and I. I became minority leader because I was the deputy under Senator Lou DeLuca, who came to my office one day and informed me that he was pleading to a misdemeanor of, meeting with a very bad person about threatening and potential physical, abuse to a granddaughter. Now, regardless of how he felt, that was something that I thought needed to be investigated, as did the Democrats. Much to my dismay, the Democrats decided to drop the issue after he did, other than Ed Meyer. I've proposed almost every year since that an ethics committee for the legislature. I called on Senator Gaffey, who was a Democrat, to step down about a year before he ultimately did step down. I was not the first, but one of the first Republicans to call for John Rowland to step down when he was governor. So I think my record is pretty strong on, and I was the only one who stood up for Chris Donovan to step down in my party or their party. So I think my record is pretty strong on calling it out. The very first time, I don't want to bore you too much, but the very first time I ran for office in 1998, my opponent had run a series of very critical pieces of me, attack ads. And I said I wasn't going to do it, and after about 4 weeks of attack ads, my people convinced me to run one, newspaper ad which was critical of him. I did it, and Curtis Clark, who's the editor of the Newtown Bee, wrote an editorial criticizing me. And I went in, I had all of his negative ads and my one, and he said, and I said, where was the editorial criticizing him? And he said to me, we expected him to do it. We expected more out of you. And from that moment, I shut down that ad, didn't run it again, and didn't run any others, because I was actually proud to be held to a higher standard. So I have tried to hold myself to that higher standard. I think if you run for public office, you should expect to be held, scrutinized more, held to a higher standard, because people look at us and look to us for trust and help, and so we should hold ourselves to that. So I think I've done that. I've offered the Ethics Commission so many times I can't remember. The Senate Democrats, to be very honest, came out and said, we're going to pass an Ethics Commission, and Senator Meyer and I sat in my office on several occasions going over the language. Little things like, who can file a complaint? Should it be a member of the Senate? Should it be a member of the public? Do you have to swear under oath that the facts you know? Those types of things. And we came together with an agreement, brought it before the Senate, and all of the Democrats but Senator Meyer voted against it. Senator Looney led the charge and uttered 3 objections he had to the bill. Senator Meyer, who took a lot of courage of him to do this, went back with me, and we replaced our 3 points with Senator Looney's 3 points, regardless of what we thought about them, put it back again, and it didn't pass. So I think there is fear on both parties, but especially in the majority party, that those types of things will be used to go after them. And I have no doubt that politics would take over at some point, but it's still worth having.
And how do you think some of these scandals that have happened would have played out differently? Do you think there would have been specific accountability that would have led to people leaving, or how would it have played differently if it was in place the way you wanted it to?
I think it would do 2 things. One, I think it would, I can't say it would be a deterrent, but I think it would have led to people deciding either not to run for re-election or resigning in a couple of instances, and I think it would have helped restore faith and trust in elected officials and the public. I don't think it completely restores it. But the sad part is when somebody does something wrong in elected office, I think there's almost an apathy because people think we're all that way. And that's what I think gets me and many of my colleagues so upset, because we're not.
Right. I mean, one of the cases that comes to mind is Representative Hewitt, who would probably assume he's going to win re-election.
Right.
Where there wasn't even basic workplace safeguards against sexual harassment of interns and so forth. Is that fixed?
No, it's not fixed. Look, I think Speaker Sharkey has dealt with some difficult issues. I think he's done a pretty good job. There was an issue with Jeff Luxembourg and his business. There was an issue with Ernie Hewitt. There was an issue with Christine Ayala. I mean, these are not partisan issues. Both parties have got, plenty of history of people who've screwed up.
What do you mean when you say it's not fixed?
Well, I think other than the Speaker taking independent action on members of his caucus, that's still the only measure of protection we have within the legislature. We have the Outside Ethics Commission, but I think people want to know that we're holding each other accountable. And just having the Speaker or the leader of a caucus decide what the punishment, and I don't think is an open enough process for the public.
Why haven't you done more and others done more to shun people like Mark Loretti with public corruption investigation? Do you want him on at the convention with an equal footing, and Martha Dean with the Newtown conspiracy stuff?
Yeah.
How come you guys can't purge the crazies and the corrupt out of the bunch?
Oh, I mean,
My words, not yours.
yeah, no, I think, my public statement against Martha Dean was as strong as a public statement as you'll ever see.
Okay.
I mean, you can't, people are allowed to register for whatever party, run for whatever office they want to. Democrats haven't purged Ernie Newton. He got the endorsement to run for state representative. So, I think you just have to be a voice in calling those people out. I did that to Ms. Dean. It certainly hasn't helped me in getting her supporters to vote for me, but I'm okay with that. You look like you had a question.
Yeah.
No, I'm fighting a summer cold. It's a strange thing.
Can we talk transportation?
Sure.
So, for the second time in like 2 weeks, the bridge in Norwalk got stuck open. Whose responsibility is this ultimately, and how do we get these kinds of issues fixed?
Ultimately, it's the state of Connecticut's responsibility, and it gets fixed by gubernatorial leadership. I've been there through the Transportation Strategy Board days, where Speaker Moira Lyons, Democrat from Stamford, and John Rowland decided, hey, we're not making the investments in transportation. The political process is preventing that from happening. Let's put it in a non-political process. A lot of very good people did a lot of very good work on that Transportation Strategy Board, came with recommendations, and it did what everybody said it wouldn't do. It sat on the shelf and wasn't moved. At the end of the day, the legislature and the governor have to be willing to commit the dollars to the right projects. I think Governor Rell made the most significant transportation investments in 2 or 3 decades when she made investments in the new rail cars and the rail yard here in New Haven, and that was done because of her leadership and Jim Amon, Democrat Speaker of the House. It takes a governor who's willing to lead and who's willing to cooperate in a bipartisan fashion with a partner in the legislature. But ultimately, that's our responsibility. The idea that the governor wants to wait for federal dollars for the Norwalk Bridge, I think, is a mistake. I think we should have put the money into that and gotten reimbursed from the federal government to the extent possible.
Is saying, well, we had the money for this bridge, we spent it on the busway. Is that apples and oranges? Is that a fair criticism?
I think it's a very fair criticism. I think I'm not saying that all of us share some of the blame. We've been in office, but the money for the busway was a waste of money, given the other priorities we have as a state. It's over $550 million. There's approximately, I'm going to estimate here, 115 to 120 million. That's state funds. The balance comes from the federal government. Of the money from the federal government, over 130, I believe, is money that was flexible funding that could have been used for anything. So there's conservatively 250 million that we could have spent on any transportation project. He chose the busway. I think it was a mistake. I think it's fair to criticize taking money out of the Special Transportation Fund, given the fact that when he ran for office and was first elected, he said, that was a mistake to do it. I will not let it happen again. He's done it to the tune of $189 million.
But now all those Rockettes fans can get to Hartford. To the
Well,
stadium.
but here's the real challenge we have, and Mayor Harp said it when she was first sworn in, and we haven't always agreed. We have a couple of $1 billion worth of maintenance fixes that are necessary just on the rail line. I'm sorry, a couple billion. I think I said million. A couple $1 billion just to get it running the way it should. What our goal as a state should be, and I don't know whether it's a 10 or a 20-year goal, but it should be a goal, is to say from New Haven to Manhattan is going to be 20 minutes shorter than it is right now. It's probably the only thing in any of our lives where it takes longer to get to, where it's less efficient now than it was 20, 30 years ago. So I represent a ton of commuters. I think the Fairfield train station is the third most used station on the branch. And it takes longer for them to get from Fairfield to Manhattan than it did 20 years ago. And when you look at the economies of particularly Bridgeport, New Haven I think benefits tremendously as well, but probably Bridgeport more than any other. If you can reduce the commute time, you make Bridgeport a viable economic engine for the state. There are a lot of companies who've stopped in Stamford. The reason why they stop when you ask them is because they can only be a certain distance away from New York City. And they're not even moving their back office jobs to Bridgeport. If you make that commute shorter, faster, more reliable, I think you see companies look at Bridgeport as a viable place to put their employees as well.
So I'm a Litchfield County person, and we have election after election, we have a bunch of people from Fairfield County
Right.
with rail improvements. What is that going to do for? What is it going to do for us? How do you get your name known up there, and what's your message to that part of the state in terms of feeling like it's continually, and the Northeast corner too, feeling like it's continually kind of like left out of the discussion? And how pissed are you that Anna Rohraback can't campaign for you actively?
Well, the latter part has got me very upset. I would have done a lot better in the convention with Andrew's help. Well, I think the name recognition in a primary is not as important. Look, we know on average 25% of the registered Republicans are going to vote.
And they're going to be educated.
So the question is, what 25 are coming to vote? Are they going to be more of my 25, more of Tom Foley's or Mark Boughton's? 3 years ago, I think Ambassador Foley got 50,000 plus votes that won it. So it's really about counting to about 50,000, and when you get there, making sure they all go vote. In terms of the general election, $6.5 million grant from the state is more than enough to run statewide in Connecticut. We're still a small state. You'd be, my words, an idiot if you bought New York TV time. It's just outrageously expensive. So you can run a good campaign. I think.
You're calling Linda McMahon an idiot?
I think after. No, I said. Well, yeah, 50 million is more than. I think after I win the primary, the momentum I will have for upsetting the front runner will get me, significant name recognition alone. My message in Litchfield County, specifically with transportation and linking it to the economy, is they need to understand that this rail line is very important to them as well, because it's important to the entire health of the state of Connecticut. We're losing jobs, we're losing people. The jobs and people we're losing are not at the low end of the income scale; they're at the high end. And those are the people we want to retain everybody, but those people are important to our revenue source, they're important to our economy. So I've been not in every town of the state, but I've been to a lot of towns, and I tell them that we need to invest in this rail line. And I can stand up and argue that in Litchfield or New London or, even the quiet corner up there in places like, Pomfret and Canterbury and the like.
Do we have the resources? I mean, it suggested that the DOT should go in there and fix it, essentially. I mean, do we have the capability of doing that?
I think we do.
I guess there's also the, this was taken out of the capital budget in 2008, and this particular bridge because of problems in 2008. So I don't know, was it never put back in again at the DOT?
I've seen it on a list of projects, so I would have to investigate more as to what's technically on the capital project list or not. I know the governor's made the allegation that Governor Rell took it off in 2008, but he didn't put it back on until very recently. So if we look at transportation in terms of economic development, we have plenty of money to spend on our priorities. One of the downsides of separating the transportation fund and having just a special transportation fund is all of our capital transportation projects have been run with STO bonds, special transportation obligations, instead of general obligation bonds, which means they are paid for by the anticipated revenue from the gross receipts tax and the gas tax. If we can build schools, if we can build economic development projects with government obligation bonds, if we can give a corporation borrow $50 million to give to a company, to move from Cheshire to New Haven, then I don't know why we can't use government obligation bonds to support transportation projects. Under Governor Rell, we borrowed about $1.4 billion a year. This governor's increased that dramatically to 1.8. I think it might be as much as $2 billion this year. I think that's too much. I think we need to reduce that. But I think within that 1.4 billion a year, you can allocate some of that to transportation projects, especially when you look at the trend in school construction. School construction was always the largest piece of that annual borrowing. School construction numbers are coming down because we've done so much over the last 10, 20 years. So I've advocated for a number of years, nobody's listened to me. I haven't had anyone say I'm wrong, that if you don't have enough revenue under the STO, bless you, under the STO bonds, you can use government obligation bonds as well.
Someone's gonna pay for that.
Well, sure, but right. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if we're going to borrow 1.4 billion a year, I think what the governor has to do, what I will do as governor, is say, here's how much we're going to borrow. There's only so much we can pay for every year in terms of our debt cost. When the governor and the secretary go to Wall Street and talk with the bond rating agencies, they want stability. They want to know how much you're going to borrow and that you're going to keep your promises. So whatever that cap is going to be, and so for hypothetical purposes, say 1.4 billion, within that you're going to prioritize what are the most important capital projects for the state. And I think you can easily make the argument, and I do make the argument, that transportation projects are within the top priorities of a state, because transportation is not just about moving cars and trains. It's about economic development. A lot of business owners will tell you they can't attract good, qualified employees here because of the inability to get to work easily or in a timely manner.
Well, why can't we bring those jobs right here? Because what you're talking about is a transportation system that gets you to some other place. I mean, if I'm in New Haven, why can't I have a job in New Haven?
Well, we need to do a better job. I think a better train system, a better mass transportation system helps New Haven, just as it's helped Stamford and Bridgeport. There are people who are actually commuting from New York to Stamford, but we're not gonna we're not gonna get rid of Manhattan, nor do we want to get rid of New York as the financial center of the world, because that's so critical to us. But we can improve people living in Milford, living in Orange, and taking the train, whether it's to Norwalk, south, or to New Haven, north.
Well, and a lot of income tax revenue comes from people commuting to New York, right?
Yeah.
So what would you take off the bonding? If there's 1.4 billion, and that's too much, you say, for the state. Which project would you not have?
There are two things that I would eliminate. One, any of the borrowing that covers operating expenses and a hole in the budget. I don't think you can do that. I think you have to honestly account for that, and that means reducing your spending or raising your revenue. I would prefer the former, not the latter. And I would not be using any of our ability to borrow to give money to corporations.
So,
or build stadiums or tennis tournaments.
Okay. So, I've heard a lot of criticism of the governor over that. And so you're saying that if someone came and was going to open a headquarters here with 500 jobs or whatever it is between here and Massachusetts, and they needed tax breaks or a loan because they were being offered something like that, you just say, see ya?
No, I think moving a company from one town in Connecticut to another is a mistake.
Okay.
I applauded the governor's deal moving NBC Sports to Stamford. That was a business that was not there, that started a new business in Stamford. Governor Rell did the same thing with Starwood Hotels, which I thought was a good deal. At the same time, I criticized Governor Rell for moving Diageo from Stamford to Norwalk. The reality is, and look, I understand that, other states have been competing for our jobs for as long as I've been in the state senate. I mean, you always heard CBIA and other business groups come up and tell us, here's the marketing brochure from South Carolina, here's the marketing brochure from Georgia, and they basically tell you what the cost of living is, how much you can buy a house, what your commute time is, how much health care costs you per employee. Comparing the two states, Connecticut's more expensive. That's been happening for a while. But if we're going to have a policy that says as soon as a company raises their hand and says, I'm thinking about moving, we're going to sit down and negotiate how much we're going to pay them to stay here, we're going to run out of money. because every company's going to do that. I had someone from a large headquarter company in Northwest Connecticut say, listen, most of our operations are now in Texas. We don't see why we shouldn't go to the governor and say, if you want to keep our 400 or 500 jobs here, give us some money too.
But you're not going to just withdraw from the table of talking about that stuff.
I think you need to fix the problems that cause companies to want to move. And if you do that, it's not going to happen overnight. And you may lose a company or two during the process. But at the end of the day, if you fix the problems where people aren't going to want to move, you're also going to see people who are going to want to come here. I mean, we have tremendous assets. And it's why we continue to retain so many of the jobs that we do. And the proximity to Boston and New York, the educational power we have between Yale and UConn, the investments that UConn's now making, but Yale's been making for a while in terms of biotech and those types of things, are very attractive to the emerging and leading edge businesses. So Connecticut's always going to have advantages because of our location and because of our talented workforce, our educated workforce. But if you fix the problems with transportation, if you fix the problems with cost of living, and I think high taxes, if you get a government that can turn around applications in a quicker, more timely manner, I think Connecticut.
So you'll
can work.
say, we're not going to match this $100 million package that Massachusetts is giving you, but we went from 3rd to 5th on highest tax state, so that should make you feel better. Is that the message? Or?
Well, I mean, how do you spend? $115 million. So Bridgewater can go from Westport to Stamford. I know a couple of people work at Bridgewater, sort of social friends. They never said to me, hey, we're thinking about moving to New York. It was never on their radar. Since most of their operations are in Westport and I represent part of Westport, I've been keenly aware that they've been outgrowing their space needs because they've been so tremendously successful. $20 million more to ESPN, and the list goes on. I've just forgotten the name of the pharmaceutical company that's moving from Alexion from Cheshire, New Haven. Ironically, they started in New Haven and moved to Cheshire. When they have almost $1 billion of cash on their books, that doesn't make any sense to me. Because that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that money comes from taxpayers. So you've had a sales tax increase, which hurts everybody, but is particularly regressive on the middle class more than any other, and I don't see that as a net positive. If you took all of that money and eliminated corporate taxes or did something to lower tax rates, I think make Connecticut more competitive. So the leaders of these companies don't want to move.
So let me challenge you on the moving from one city to the other. How do you rebuild cities like New Haven and Bridgeport and Hartford without some kind of strategy for getting people? Am I stealing you guys' questions?
Yeah, it's okay.
No, I think that's a great point. And what's an interesting sort of surprising play in the political landscape in the governor's race is I can't tell you how many people have said to me, why can't we do what New York's doing? I see their ads on TV, I hear their ads on the radio. Come move to New York, get 10 years of tax-free. And what they don't tell you on the ads is there are enterprise zones, targeted investment areas. Right. You can't move to Westchester and get 10 years of tax-free. That's something we should be doing in Connecticut. It can't be 169 towns. I don't think you play winners and losers in terms of what company gets it and one company does it.
So even in Litchfield County, so do you build a new building in an industrial park in Farmington, or does someone in the governor's office say, we've got 1 million square feet of brownfields industrial vacant space in what used to be a town with a lot of blue-collar manufacturing workers? Right. Do we just let it rot into the ground?
Well, the latter. Now we did, and I voted for incentives for people to fix up brownfields and and build on them, hopefully manufacturing, but anything, because that's better than going into greenfields. And I think if you want to have enterprise zones, which we've had in Connecticut, and have a discussion about where to limit them in a Bridgeport, in a New Haven, that would be fine, because then you're letting the market determine who's going to develop there and go there. You're not paying one company versus another company. I mean, again, I'll go back to the hedge fund because it really is the most egregious example. But there was, I think, a $10 to $12 billion hedge fund, Ed Lampert's hedge fund, that left Greenwich to Florida. We didn't pay them to stay. Why one hedge fund versus another? Whereas if you have enterprise zones, then you're saying, this is where we want you to build and grow jobs, but we're not going to pick and choose who it is.
So a lot of what you said comes out of a lot of things that you hear from CPIA, and they've done a lot of analysis on this. But one of the things that they bring up all the time is the education of our workforce, and the fact that our workforce, it's really great on the top, it's not so great on the bottom, and it may not be that great in the middle as far as what type of places we can attract, what kind of businesses we can attract. I mean, what is your assessment of how well prepared our workforce is to attract employers here?
I think our workforce and the education levels and the talent of our workforce is our greatest asset, but there's a lot more we can do. When I talk to especially what I would call small to medium-sized manufacturing companies, they're the ones who are actually saying, we have openings, but we can't find the person to fit, which is why working on things like apprenticeship programs where you can defray the cost of training someone to then go into manufacturing, better investments in our technical schools, our community colleges, because they're training grounds for those things. Look, when you talk about our economy, it's not just taxes and regulations, it's transportation, cost of energy, and education's a huge part of that. So we need to do a better job. Years ago, Governor Relt proposed, but I think did not do a good job of fleshing out the proposal and marketing it. I think she was short on both ends. What she called the middle college system. Now I don't know if the name middle college doesn't sound very good to me, but it was about connecting our vocational technical schools and our community colleges. I've got 3 teenagers. My oldest is going to college next year, but the reality is not every kid is built to go to college, and not every kid should go to college. But when you talk to, say, a manufacturing business, in Connecticut, they're highly skilled manufacturers. They tend to be generationally owned, and they tend to have extraordinarily longevity of their workforce. People who work there for 20, 30 years in these small companies. You know, that's a career, and a really good career that you can build. I don't think we've done a good enough job as a state of educating parents and kids. I think you can even start at the middle school level and the high school level of what a great career this could be in training people for those types of careers.
Because, I mean, I guess the example is what we have right down the street. And I spoke to Mayor Harper about Asa Apple, and she says this is a company, a European company, located anywhere in the world, but likes the particular workforce that it has here. I mean, it does not employ nearly what it may have employed years ago. But how do we duplicate that? We'll probably need to duplicate a couple more times in New Haven alone, but how do we duplicate that in other places in the state?
Again, I think your feeder is going to be your vocational technical schools and your community colleges, and having them regionally based. Community colleges, I think under Governor Rell and Governor Malloy, I think they both deserve credit, have really grown in terms of identifying what is the need of the community where they are. For example, Norwalk Community College has a leading program in terms of I don't know exactly the name of the program. It's like hotel management, and they have a lot of students come out who end up being restaurant managers, hotel managers, club managers, country club managers, and the like, because that is an industry that was in need of finding good people in the Fairfield County area.
Yeah, well, we have a bunch of kids that spend a good portion of their time in community college and remediation because they're not prepared when we get out. We're doing a good enough job K through 12 to get.
No. I mean, our entire education system can always be better, and one of the things that I think we've started to realize as a society is that the facts are pretty overwhelming, that when a child graduates from third grade, if they don't know how to read and write, they may not learn how to read and write, and you lose too many of those kids. So birth to three programs, preschool, and our public education system all need to be supported and improved.
Senator, can you, since we're on that topic, can you tell us your thoughts on Connecticut and Common Core, and whether you agree with the direction that the state is taking, or whether you would see any changes in that? If you were
Yeah, I don't agree with the direction. I think the implementation of the Common Core through the SBAC test has been a big mistake. I have that through sort of three measures. One, I have an 8th grader who took the SBAC math test, who's a high performer in her school, who showed a level of anxiety in taking the test, and a frustration over taking so many tests, and the amount of time that her class spent on teaching and talking about the tests. I don't know how that benefited her this year. I have a brother who's going on 20 plus years as a teacher in the Bridgeport public school system in middle school, 6th to 8th grade. And he will share similar stories times 10, because a lot of his kids aren't used to having one of those at home and taking a test online, and they obviously come in with a lot of different challenges as well. And third is just talking to teachers. I've had 4th grade teachers in the Fairfield public school system tell me that they have to take time out of their daily curriculum teaching to teach kids how to type, so they would be prepared to actually type and take the SBAC test. I don't see how any of that is a positive for us. I also think that the direction we had gone in, which I believe has now been severed by the recommendations of the Peak Commission, but the idea that we would evaluate a teacher based on how their kids do on these SBAC tests is a huge mistake. So I think, Common Core and the idea of it, that we're going to have the same standards in 45 of the 50 states, to me doesn't make a lot of sense. Having standards and evaluating kids does, but I think we can do that ourselves in Connecticut, not have to be tied to one system. And I think just as a policy matter, having our Department of Education pass the Common Core standards without a vote of a legislature was a big mistake as well.
So what happens to Common Core under a McKinney administration?
I think we do away with it and start over again and find out what are the standards and evaluative measures that we want for our kids in Connecticut. I mean, can we look to what other states are doing? Yeah, absolutely, we should. Just as I like to argue on a local level, if I live in Fairfield, the town next door to us on the south is Westport. If they're doing something that is working better than us, we don't need to, create a new mousetrap. Let's take what they're doing if it works in our school system. But I think we need to, from a implementation of the SBAC testing and the Common Core, I think we need to start over.
Can you expand a little bit before, when you were mentioning we need to do some different things with birth certificate programs, pre-K, public ed? What kind of things would you like to see? What would you like to change?
Well, the birth to 3 programs, I think, comes down to making sure we have state funding for the programs we have. Pre-K, I supported the initiative that the legislature and the governor came up with this year. I have some reservations about the future of that, in that I want to make sure there are enough pre-K slots for parents who want to avail themselves of that, and to the extent that kids are going to preschool in the back of a church like my kids did, if some don't have the ability to pay for it, that there's help for them. I'm not sure I want to remake a new public school system, which is now K through 12, pre-K through 12, because I think there, is a pretty good system that works out there now that just needs to be supplemented. In terms of K through 12, I think we need to focus. The education reform didn't come, and I voted for it, with mixed emotions, didn't come to all of the promises that I thought we would get to. There was a promise to take high-performing districts and leave them alone. We haven't given them the flexibility they were promised. And I think the immediate focus needs to be on the lowest performing districts.
And I know you mentioned your brother, the teacher in Bridgeport. Obviously, there's a lot of discussions going on. Bridgeport's kind of in the epicenter of this whole charter,
Right.
Argument. Where do you stand on that?
I've been to Amistad several times, and I was there for some of their award ceremonies. It's an amazing environment, and so I think the state should be supportive of public charter schools. But I don't and couldn't let that happen to the expense of our traditional public school system. At the end of the day, over 90% of all of our kids are going to grow up learning in a public school, and we can't lose focus on that to the extent that we support others. Should we have charter schools? Yes. Do I support them? Yes, but not if it's going to be taking funding away from the public schools.
So is that a big distinction between you and Mr. Foley? I mean, he was talking about money follows the child.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. Look, I've never been comfortable with vouchers. I think if you want to look at a school district or a school that has repeatedly failed its children by a universal set of measures, and parents want an option to get out of that, I'm okay with that, because not everybody can sell their house and move their school district. But I don't believe that, I, for example, living in a town like Fairfield, should get government money to send my kids to a private or parochial school.
I mean, charter schools backed by a lot of hedge fund money, a lot of folks making a lot of money in charter schools. I mean, are you doing the same thing to some degree?
No. Look, the promise, I wasn't in the legislature when charter schools originally started, but the promise was they're public schools, and they'll have some flexibility that our quote-unquote traditional public schools don't have. That flexibility can be used as sort of an incubator to see if there are system-wide changes we can make to help better educate our kids, and that they could do it for the same amount of money or less. And I think we hold them to that promise. I think you need to look at their admission policies and their retention policies so that they're having open admissions, so that the percentage of ESL students is the same as you might find in a traditional public school, and so I think that it's very different than a private or parochial school in that respect.
The intentions are nice, but what we've seen in practice seems to be, I don't think we can ignore that. In practice, some of these schools charge ridiculous amounts of management fees, and people are getting extremely wealthy off of the operation of these, off taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, look, I don't know enough about the hedge fund types and all those who are involved in the education system. They're not supportive of my candidacy, I can promise you that. If I don't care who is making money if the product is the right product at the right price. I mean, if we can educate kids, if the charter schools have open enrollment and people can go into a lottery system and they're not picking and choosing what kids they have, and even the idea that someone signs their child up for a lottery tends to imply a different level of awareness perhaps on their parents. And again, going back to my brother's experience, with my 3 kids in Fairfield Public Schools on a parent-teacher night, you talk to their teachers and they'll tell you that they get about 95% of the kids have at least a parent or both parents show up. My brother will tell you he'll have to have some Saturday parent, meetings because he can't get more than, 25-30% of the parents show up. So, and there's oftentimes a direct correlation between how well the kid is doing and the fact that that child's parents are at the parent-teacher night. So, if we're educating our kids and the money's doing what it should be doing, if they can figure out a way to make money off it, I'm okay with that. But I just don't know enough about it. My understanding is you have some extremely wealthy people who are investing in this different type of school system. I don't know if they're making money off it or not.
Can you tell us one or two things that you think Governor Malloy has done well?
Gosh, I got asked that question the other day, and I stumbled on it, and I'm stumbling on it again. He's done a number of things well. I supported his preschool. I mean, the Democrats in the legislature and the Republicans also worked on a preschool plan. But at the end of the day, he was the one who stood up and said, we're going to do this. It may have looked not exactly like his plan, but I think his leadership was critical in that. I think on a personal level, how he represented the state and the people I represent in Newtown and the families of that tragedy, I give him extraordinarily high marks on that. I was there, that whole day when he came, when he left, saw what he lived through, what I lived through, but it's clearly different being the governor. Clearly different, and I think he did an extraordinary job with that.
I was going to say, the two of you going through that together on that day, I would think it would, when you're standing up in a debate, it's hard to be nasty to each other, personally nasty.
Well, I don't know that he might take this differently. I don't know that any of my criticisms of his policies have been personal. I don't have any personal dislike or animosity towards him. I don't know him well enough. Our limited interactions, lead me to like him, but I couldn't say. I mean, I would never criticize somebody on a personal level I don't know personally. There was I said this at the time. There was a moment at the firehouse in Sandy Hook where he was on a stool by himself, just sort of staring, and I went over and said, "How you doing?" And we talked about his kids, my kids, something. I think it was my son was a hockey player. He had a son who was a hockey player, and I think his older son refereed my son's game. So we talked about that. Completely a source of nothing, but it wasn't what we were there doing. And I think, for the 3, 6, 9 months, year after that, randomly when we saw each other, same with the lieutenant governor, be like, "Are you doing okay? How are you doing?" Between the two of us. Right. And so, no, am I gonna call him names? No, but
Did you see some of the Foley Malloy debates?
I did. Yeah, I did. Look, I mean, I have people tell me. I've had media consultants tell me. I've had Republicans tell me. I've had friends tell me. Even newspaper media people have said, "Oh, come on, you have to attack. This is, of course you're going to do it." As if my unwillingness to make personal attacks is a sign of weakness. And so finally, I just stood up at a Republican meeting and I said, "Let me tell you what weak is. Weak is getting up and saying, 'Don't vote for the other guy because he's a really bad guy.' Strength is saying, 'Vote for me because I have better ideas.'" And so, I know that's some naive world that hasn't existed even in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, but I think you can have honest, real differences of philosophy and opinion. You can be sharp in your criticism, like I have been on the most recent transportation funding, but you can leave it at that. You can leave it at the policy level.
So if you were to, boil it down in the primary, what are the biggest differences of philosophy between you and Mayor Bowden and you and Ambassador Foley? If you could articulate that for us.
Well, I think there's more than just philosophical differences, and so I want to address your question, but I've put together a state budget. The other two haven't. It was a budget that made significantly difficult decisions in where we would spend less money, and I don't think you can come in and learn that overnight. And I think given the deficit challenges the next governor faces, you have to be ready to do that. And I've worked with Democrats in the legislature and gotten things done, which I don't think you can learn overnight as well. Philosophically, I think there are some issues on the education front. I think primarily in terms of the state budget, I haven't heard Mayor Bowden, I haven't heard Mark talk about it. I know Ambassador Foley talks about leaving discretionary spending flat for 2 years, in putting together a possible budget and running numbers through the Office of Fiscal Analysis. Given current trends, that leaves a $700–800 million deficit. So if that's your spending side, you know, there are now 2 ways left to deal with that deficit, taxes or borrowing. And so I think you actually have to do more on the spending reduction side than he would. I've also talked a lot about transforming our social service delivery system, which I haven't heard the other candidates talk about. And that's not something you can do in a year or two. It would probably take a full term to do. And there are some challenges in doing it. But the nonprofit organizations, the private providers throughout our state, have always gotten short shrift from government. We've never been a full partner, and they can provide the social service care and delivery, I think, better than the state can. So when I'm governor, I would like to transition the state out of that and fully partner with private providers across the state. The other idea that I've talked about, and I haven't been able to convince a Republican or a Democrat governor to do it, is to create an Office of Inspector General. I think there has to be an independent body looking at waste, fraud, and abuse in state government. The legislature is a part-time legislature. You know that. We don't have the time. And
how would you define independent? We have all kinds of independent commissions or whatever that answer to the government ultimately.
There's a commission that would recommend a person. I'm okay with whether it's a gubernatorial appointment and legislative approval from a group of 1 or 3 or 5 picked by an independent commission. But much like as I think we need to restore the independence of the watchdog agencies, you have to do that with the Inspector General. You know, there's just there is waste in government. I mean, that's an obvious statement. Can you eliminate all of it? No. Can you do a better job of eliminating a lot of it? I think the obvious answer is yes, but we don't. I mean, we just simply don't have the time or the energy to do that. And I hear from a lot of state employees who are afraid to be quote-unquote whistleblowers, because if they want to call something out in their agency, they have to go to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office represents the agency. And they're afraid to do that, because if you call out, you know, your division head, George Jepson's going to have somebody call the division head to say, come in and let's talk about this. And it's never made sense to me. I've put in amendments in the past.
And ultimately, the AG will have to defend the agency in a suit or whatever.
Correct. And you know, I get along very well with George Jepson. I like him a lot. I had sharp disagreements with Dick Blumenthal over it. He argued that they had put in a Chinese wall between the people who protect the whistleblowers and the people who protect the agencies. And so we FOIA'd, you know, all of his, you know, agency staffing charts and everything to find out, okay, who are the whistleblower protector attorneys and who are the agency attorneys, and there weren't any. You know, maybe 6 months ago, I got an email from someone who worked in Department of Social Services, and she had emailed me about double payment in our foster parenting system in the state, because there's a DCF role and a DSS role, and without getting into too many of the details, you get paid to be a foster parent from when you start. You go through an application process, and when the application process is done and you're approved, then you get paid by a different agency. Upon approval for that application, that agency was paying people retroactively. So they were getting paid before an application by one agency of government, and then getting paid for that time retroactively by another agency. And the state had run on a system that you would then reimburse the first agency, which of course people weren't doing, and we weren't going after them because it didn't make a lot of sense to go after people who are foster parents because we don't have enough of them. So I got that email, we put in a bill, we passed the bill, changed the law so that there's no double paying in our foster parent system. That's one small example. But people are afraid to, I mean, even in her email she said, please don't use my name publicly. I'm afraid to talk about this. I think an inspector general goes a
So it
long way to
sounds
do
like
that.
when you're talking about distinctions between the three of you, you kind of come back to that you're immersed in all this state government stuff, and they're not. And even that's leading to your specific ideas because they wouldn't know to know that. And I mean,
Yeah, look, I think we have serious challenges, and I think you have to have an understanding of how some of the problems were created, and you have to have an ability to work with the people who are there to solve them. And I think I have that, and the other candidates don't. Look, our party sometimes tends to get into this debate about should you run government like a business. Democrats say you can't run government like a business. Republicans say you have to run government like a business. I actually think the answer is somewhere in the middle, that there are certain business practices that are transferable to government. But not everything is
there's a good trivia
transferable.
question in response to that. The only governor in New Hampshire history to serve only one term, 1 2-year term, was Craig Benson, who was a CEO who wanted to come in and run everything like a business.
Right.
It was fairly disastrous.
Stumps. Well, I mean, look, here's the reality. There are 187 legislators who aren't employees of the CEO, and you have state employees who, many of them very good, hardworking people, who might say, let's see, you're my third governor and I'll be here when there's a fourth governor. So that's why you can't transfer everything.
So while we've been talking, there was another school shooting in Oregon at a high school, which is like the 5th mass shooting in the grade or whatever. It was interesting to me to see Martha Dean get no support in the race. And I think several people have written about, where is this groundswell of gun rights, people who opposed your legislation, that seem to dominate our story comments, online story comments.
Yeah. I guess that's another difference between the candidates, since I voted for the bill, and the other two have said they wouldn't have. But.
So where do we go from here on that issue? How should people take it that you go before like a town committee and say, well, if the legislator repealed it, I would sign it. It seemed to be backtracking, and like, where's the leader? Where do you go as a leader in terms of dealing with the societal issue that we still clearly have?
And that was a 20-second snippet out of a 2.5-hour meeting where I answered every hypothetical question that could ever be answered, and I tried to answer honestly. And there's more behind that, but where do we go? Look, I think you need to continue to find ways of educating, reducing gun violence. There has been evidence that gun trafficking task forces help, especially places like New Haven, getting illegal guns off the street. I think we could do more with that. You need to do a better job of identifying and providing help for people with mental illnesses. But look, those are extraordinarily difficult issues that I don't know that anybody has an answer for.
Yesterday I saw something about, or this morning I saw something about invention of bulletproof blankets that they were going to put in elementary schools, and it just seemed to me that's pretty sad that we come to that they're not really getting at the real issue.
No, and as I try to learn, I was on the radio maybe a week or two ago. I talked about some things I learned from Kevin Sullivan when he was in the state senate. He was, I think, my memory, and I'm not disrespectful to other legislators, sort of the loudest proponent of mental health parity in our insurance laws, and I've always tried to be supportive of that. I think, honestly, and actually, the governor put it in his budget as part of a DCF recommendation, which was part of the task force recommendations from SB 1160, spending money on a public education campaign, which I actually think is an interesting and probably a good idea. There's a tremendous stigma to mental health issues. And as a parent of 3 kids, I can tell you see it. If your kid breaks a leg, you go to the doctor. If your kid is wheezing and might have asthma, you go to a doctor. If you think your kid might suffer from depression, you don't tell anybody. And you feel this concern or even shame that, oh no. And I think as adults, I have a number of friends and family members who've dealt with, addiction issues. And a lot of people who suffer from, whether it's alcohol or drug addictions, end up getting to an substance addiction because they're masking and trying to self-medicate for mental health issues. We don't do a good enough job of having people understand that these are diseases, they are health related, and they need to seek help for it. We also have not done a good job of providing help programs, resources. If you're very wealthy or if you're very poor, you can qualify. You can pay for your own, or you can qualify for some help. But if you're in the vast majority in the middle, especially for people over 18, there's not a lot out there. And it seems, again, my sort of amateur studying, a lot of especially young boys between the ages of 18 and 24, that's when you'll see evidence of things like depression, bipolar, and the like.
So you mentioned addiction, and 2010, the past year and a half, 14, 15, mostly young men have died of heroin overdoses in a town of 30,000.
Yeah.
Which is like insane. And if that was a listeria outbreak or whatever, it would be, we'd have the CDC here, or the governor or whatever would be there holding press conferences. And and in Vermont, whereas they've seen a similar problem, Governor Shumlin made that his whole State of the Union was to take a different approach to that. And so I'm curious from a law enforcement and also a treatment perspective, whether, how much.
Well, I would love to see what Governor Shumlin and others are doing. We've seen Norwich, New London have had significant problems as well. You can't ignore the law enforcement aspect for people who are distributing, selling drugs. I think there needs to be a significant punishment. But you also have to understand that addiction is a disease, and I think there needs to be a treatment option so people won't fall back. The extent of the treatment options, I don't know. Do you give people 1 chance, 2, 4? I don't know. The reality of addictions is some people can go into treatment and come out, and they deal with the addiction every day for the rest of their lives, but never go back. Some people can go 2, 3 times. Some people ultimately die before they are able to deal with their addiction issues. So there needs to be a treatment aspect and understanding of that. I am not in favor, and I know it's a controversial issue. I'm probably going against the public opinion tide. I'm not in favor of the legalization of marijuana. I've just seen too many people for whom that is what they start with, a gateway drug that leads to other worse drugs.
Are you talking about medical marijuana or recreational?
I'm not for legalization of recreational marijuana. I did not vote for the medical marijuana. And I didn't do a lot of studying on the medicinal uses. I did some because I could not get past the fact that it's a federal controlled substance. It's illegal to possess under federal law, and I don't think we have the right in Connecticut to pass a law that allows someone to break federal law. And the federal law is not enforced by choice of the president. And whether you agree with it or not, I don't think the president has the ability to say we're going to enforce these laws, not those laws. So I couldn't get past that. On a personal level, my mom just passed away of cancer. She took the Marinol, which was a pill form that was used to help ease pain and to help spur an appetite because she wasn't eating. She went from 120 to 70 pounds before she died. For her, the Marinol worked. If her doctors had come to us and said, the Marinol's not working, the other prescription medications aren't working, we think the only thing that would work, I can't tell you what I would want my mother to do. I think any kid or husband or wife would want their everything available. But I could not and cannot get by the fact that it's illegal to possess it under federal law, and I don't think we have the right to pass a law allowing people to break federal law.
Can I ask you, though, you talked about gateway, with these young people we're seeing in parts of Connecticut, their gateway is Percocet and Vicodin, and those are totally legal in this country.
Absolutely. I mean, look, again, I've tried to educate myself on all the things kids are doing because I have 3 teenagers, from aerosol cans and things, household detergents that they've cooked up to get high off of, to prescription medication that adults are addicted to and kids are, for lack of a better term, stealing from their parents. It's a huge problem, and we don't have an open. I don't think we have an open conversation about it, and we need to have an open conversation about it.
So if I could shift this a little bit. So
Sure.
if the Republican Party, you could argue if the Republican Party wasn't so completely out of touch
Your words again.
with urban areas and cities and immigrant populations and people of color, we would have Governor Foley right now, we would have Congressman Rohraback, because only a slightly better reception in the cities would have carried those elections. So what do you have to say to your party and your own candidacy to make a difference there?
Look, I think it's a combination of the message and the messenger. Everybody wants to focus on 2010, but forgets 2006. Governor Rell did significantly better in our larger urban areas than Ambassador Foley did. Similar messages, not identical, very different messengers. What was it? There's a quote that I love now about Maya Angelou. She said, "People won't remember what you said, they won't remember what you did, they'll remember how you made them feel." There has to be, people have to think that you have a level of caring about them and understand their circumstances and that you're listening to them and that you can have empathy towards them. And that comes in the messenger. And I think I have that. And I think I can go into any town or city in Connecticut and be able to listen to and converse with anybody. Doesn't mean we're going to agree. There's no doubt about that. But I think we make too much about some of the issues. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're a parent in Bridgeport or Greenwich. You want your kid to be safe. You want your kid to have a good education. You want to have a good paying job and hopefully a career.
The difference is the people in Greenwich have that, but people in Bridgeport do not.
there's a difference.
No.
There's a major
No,
difference.
absolutely.
So, okay.
Absolutely. No, I'm not suggesting that they're the same, but I think as people we want the same thing. Look, there's talk. People talk about. There's been talk in the past about like regional education. When I've talked to my brother, he'll say, look, the parents of kids at his school, they don't want their kids to go to school in Fairfield, but they want their school to be like the school in Fairfield. I mean, why is it that one school system's getting more? Why are there haves and have-nots? So I say that because I think, there's more that brings us together than divides us.
Can I ask you a little bit, something about the budget next year?
Sure.
I mean, since there's supposed to be a projected $1.4 billion, deficit right off the bat.
Right.
So that, and then you said, I guess, that you would go beyond what Mr. Foley had said about whole discretionary funding flat, and then beyond that, you said it was a $700 million deficit, so you
Right.
do something with that. What are your priorities? I mean, given what's the state going to look like? How would you deal with that amount of money?
I think the state's going to look a lot like it does now, but hopefully growing jobs and population. Look, there's,
I guess, where do we cut?
the big elephant in the room is the fact that we have unfunded pension and healthcare liabilities that the people of Connecticut cannot afford to pay. And politicians have made promises after promises with other people's money that isn't there. And so we have to have a different relationship with our employees. That's, any business will tell you, look at where they spend money. Employee costs are a huge part of that. We made a modest, and I mean modest change, not retroactively like it should have been, on how judges can qualify for their pensions. But just imagine that for a second. Tony Avalone, 67 years old, goes to the bench, has to retire at age 70. If he lives to 85, he gets $1.5 million in a pension fund. There is nobody in the private sector who has that. Nobody. No teacher in the public sector has that. That is simply outrageous that we would allow that to happen. There are professors at UConn, and I would love to talk about higher ed too, who retire, collect their pensions, and then go back and work per diem. Nobody in the real world can do that. There are people, especially in public safety, who retire with pensions that they receive on an annual basis that are greater than their highest salary because they've added 3 years of massive overtime. And the state spends $400 or $500 million in overtime a year. Those practices are fiscally irresponsible, and we need to change them. You have to change them. And when you change them, you start reducing the annual, operating budget to the state of Connecticut.
How are you gonna do that?
There's only one way you can do it. You can talk to your state employees about making changes. Look, if we have pretty clear laws and statutes about pensions, I'm not against collective bargaining. I'm not
I
trying
was
to.
gonna ask you, on a scale of let's talk to Scott Walker, where are you?
No, I'm not there. We don't need to break up unions and collective bargaining. But what I like to say is state employees are important. They deserve an honest day's pay for an honest day's work. They deserve a health care coverage, and they deserve something for their retirement. But I would match almost any private health care plan, a better than average private health care plan, against my state employee health care plan, and the costs for mine are at least double. So why can't we give state employees a health care plan that is better than average in the private sector? And there isn't anybody on a pension anymore. Now, you cannot take away pensions that people have earned, and I'm not suggesting that. But for new employees, you have to have an understanding of a different system. And for current employees, you have to have an understanding of sharing the burden of healthcare costs better than we currently do.
So will that do it, or does it have to?
No, but that's a
bigger
big part of it, Mary. But you're gonna look. We had, I think, over $900 million of different programmatic reductions in the Republican alternative budget we offered in 2011. You're going to have to look at things like that. What we tried to do was to look at areas where programs weren't working, look where there's duplication, and then look at certain programs or benefits where what Connecticut was doing was far in excess of what other states were doing, and try to come to a better understanding. If you actually, at the end of the day, as I want to, transfer social service delivery into a nonprofit community setting, you end up saving, on an annual basis, hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, I'm not suggesting that can happen in a year. I don't even think it can happen in 2 years. It's probably a 4 or 5 year program.
So you basically take the people who are providing it as state workers, and
Pay them
that becomes the responsibility of the private sector. I mean, how do you do that? Are you talking about layoffs and?
Well, look, if you have a universe of people who are getting care, whether it's people with developmental disabilities, elderly, or whatever they are, and we have Riverview Hospital was my best example, where Gene Milstein blew the whistle on the fact that it cost over $1 million per child per year to care for at Riverview Hospital. She found that because she went in to first investigate the treatment of the kids at that hospital. It's a state-owned hospital. There's no other state in New England that has a state-owned facility. And what she found is that at the state facility, they were using restraints. Now these are boys and girls, kids with severe mental health issues that need supervision 24/7. Nobody denies that. But they were using restraints, over 1,000 incidents of restraining kids a year. And then if you go look at how Yale treats them or how St. Vincent's treats them down in my town, you'll find that their incidents of restraints are in the single digits. So from a treatment standpoint, there's a philosophical difference. And from a cost standpoint, it's different. Yes, the people who work at Yale New Haven Hospital do not get the health care and pension benefits that state employees do, so their per employee cost is less. But that's the real world. that we need to deal in. So you're not going to cut programs. I'm not going to cut their programs, but we can deliver them through a different model that costs less. There was a gentleman who ran St. Vincent's Health Services down in Westport, their Westport branch. They took over substance abuse and mental health hospital called Holbrook Hospital out of Westport. He ran it for about 4 years. He had come from New Jersey, and he had done the process in New Jersey where they partnered with New Jersey area hospitals to care for the kids instead of caring for them in a state facility. It can work. Do you need as many state employees to take care of them? Ultimately, no, you don't. We have about 900 to 1,000 state employees we lose every year through attrition. There are ways I think you can do it without mass layoffs, but at the end of the day, your obligation is to the over 3 million people in the state of Connecticut. And if you could care for that person who needs help in a system that saves the taxpayer money, I think you have an obligation to do that.
So you layer in your entire vision, and the state workforce goes from what to what?
I think it's smaller than it is now, but I can't give you a number.
50%?
Oh,
10%,
no,
5%?
no. Closer to 5 to 10% small, yeah. No, 50%.
Where do you stand on tolls?
I'm against tolls.
You're against tolls.
Well, give us the money to fix all these bridges.
Well, I always get in trouble with hypotheticals. Look, the money that we raise from people for transportation isn't going to transportation. So you have to first, in my world, as governor, guarantee that all the money that goes and is supposed to go to transportation goes there. Then you have to prioritize your projects. Again, I think the busway was a mistake. You can't stop it now. And then look at where your long-term needs are. If you could guarantee me that I could reduce the gas tax $1 for every dollar you could raise in tolls, then I might be willing to talk about that, because I think the gas tax is more regressive and the tolls are more of a user fee. But there's no way I could get to that guarantee, so for me it's almost a useless conversation. Border tolls I think are unfair to border towns. And I don't know that congestion mitigation pricing would really work. What people are talking about, peak times, off-peak times, when you travel, how far you travel. I don't know that that works in Connecticut.
Going back to the rails, you said 20 years ago the trips were a lot shorter. I was a commuter 20 years ago. I don't remember them being significantly shorter back then, but what would you do to make them a 20-minute difference?
Yeah, I apologize if I said a lot shorter, but and I don't commute to New York, but all the constituents I have says it takes longer to get to New York now than it did 20 years ago. Look, this is and again, I don't know whether I said 10-year, 20-year, I don't know the answer, but this is a massive project that we have to undertake. I think we have to undertake it in partnership with New York, especially, and Massachusetts. And I think it has to have, for it to happen, it has to have the buy-in from the region and the federal government, because they're going to finance most of it. But if the federal government can do the big dig for Boston, then certainly our federal delegation, working with New York and Massachusetts, can get something for the Northeast Corridor rail line. I think. What's that?
Where would you put that money?
Well, I think you have to put it all into the rail line, to making sure you can get. There are a lot of issues along our rail line. Part of it is a lot of the curves and corners that we have, which are real safety hazards, which slow the trains down. But you're going to have to improve the efficiency of the rail line, which means making sure the tracks are in better repair.
How about the bridges? Do you think
Well, you have to. Look, there are, I think, 4 bridges between New Haven and Greenwich that are all in excess of 100 years old. The Walk Bridge in Norwalk is now popular because it's been stuck twice. It's 117 or 118 years old. There are 3 other bridges that are in the same condition. They have to be a top priority for the Department of Transportation, and we need a plan to fix them. And you have to pay for it. I think the cost of the 4 bridges is around $1.2 to $1.4 billion.
Going back to social services for a minute, are there any departments that you would see eliminating eventually?
I don't think you eliminate departments, but I think in terms of direct care and direct services, I think the nonprofit sector can do it and is doing it better than the state can do it. But you look, whether it's the state doing it or it's a nonprofit doing it, you still need to make sure state dollars are going to be flowing and partnering with the nonprofits, and you need to make sure there's oversight and accountability for what's happening. I mean, I think it's way too naive to believe that there are no mistakes made, whether it's by the state or by the nonprofit sector. So you need to make sure that there is that oversight and accountability.
So you were a big supporter of the earned income tax credit back in 2008. I mean, consistently supporting it as a good investment and maybe even more fruitful, I guess, than minimum wage increase.
Right.
So why do you back off of it now?
Well, two reasons. Well, again, you're right. I don't philosophically oppose the earned income tax credit. I did vote for it when I was on the finance committee. That was about a 5 or 10% earned income tax credit. There are two differences in the Malloy approach that I would take, and then there's a third reason. First, the fact that we link our earned income tax credit automatically to the federal earned income tax credit means that we are unable to eliminate any fraud in the system. And study after study has indicated that there is some fraud in the system. And so we're giving money out to people who shouldn't get it. And I think we should do our best to eliminate that. The second is I think 30% is too much. I think it's unaffordable in this economy. So, yeah, the third reason is just because of our budget deficits and our economy. I think it was unaffordable.
So what figure, I guess, you would be more comfortable with? Just
Depending on where our budget is and if we can make sure that, we can hold the accountability on who gets it, I think a 5 or 10% earned income tax credit can be helpful. Look, at the end of the day, I believe, what Ronald Reagan said. You're giving people their money back, whether it's a tax cut or an earned income tax credit or something of that nature. I think people are better stewards of their money than the government is in almost every instance. So I would want to look at cutting taxes and doing things like that as well.
While we're talking about budgeting and things like that, can we talk a little bit about ECS funding? I know it's circling back to education.
Sure.
What do you think needs to be done? Do you think the way it's set up now works?
I don't think it works in theory, but for the political purposes, it's worked because the first thing legislators do when a budget comes out and the governor gives an ECS money is to look at where their town is vis-a-vis how they did the last year. I think ECS reform needs to be coupled with mandate relief. And if we're going to have what I think is a brutally honest discussion about state spending and municipal aid, because in none of our Republican budgets have we cut municipal aid, I think that you can't do that unless you're going to give municipal relief as well, and that would come in mandate relief, and they've been, politically extremely difficult. Do I think we should look at them? Yes, but in terms of my priorities, continuing to fund education is important. I am worried about the CJEF lawsuit. I think that's what an acronym is now called. And I don't simply think just throwing money at the problem increases the level of education. I haven't seen any evidence of that, that just increasing aid gets you a better education system.
It's okay that some cities, looking at cities like Bridgeport, that even the state's own analysis says that they're about $43 million short of what they should get compared to comparable sized districts.
Right. I haven't seen that study, but no, it's not okay that we continue to have the current education system we have in Bridgeport. There needs to be improvements. I can't remember the year, so I apologize, but when Bill Finch left the state Senate and was elected mayor and sworn in as mayor, it was a special election, and Rob Russo, a Republican, won, held the seat for I think about 3 months, and then lost in November. During that 3-month period, he and I were able to convinced Governor Rell to put, I think it was a $250,000 grant into a larger project that the Greater Bridgeport Regional Business Council was doing in terms of auditing the Bridgeport Board of Education and the education system because of the fear that they weren't putting enough money into the education system. In fact, the minimum budget requirement law really became about Bridgeport because Bridgeport wasn't even putting all the money that the state was giving them for education and education. The most shocking thing that came out of that audit process to me was sitting down with the former superintendent, whose name I've forgotten, I apologize.
Ramos at the time?
Yes, thank you, John Ramos. And he was new in the job, but asked the question, Senator Russo was in the room, I believe Mayor Finch was there, do you know how many employees you have in the Board of Education? And he said, I can't give you that answer. And we said, well, can you find out? He said, I won't be able to find out and give you the answer. They were still had things on like card catalog, in terms of employees and who was working. So I think there are tremendous problems. Things have improved. That was a while ago. But again, philosophically, I think if you say, okay, we're going to increase ECS spending X, that's going to give us a better school system. I don't believe that's the case. It's a lot more complicated than just increasing the ECS money.
Do you think that if there are concerns about how much money or where a Board of Education is spending their money, should the state or the town be able to step in more? Where should the power lie with that?
I think that's the toughest question because, we have a tradition in Connecticut, which is a good one, of local control. I do believe that local education decisions are better than state one-size-fits-all decisions. The most recent example I can give you is in-school suspension. I think that should be up to the school district, how they want to suspend their kids. I have no doubt that in some districts or for some kids, an in-school suspension is a better way for punishing than out of school, but I don't think that's universally the case. I like to joke that if my kids were suspended, they would be much better in school than they would be coming home to me. But so I want that type of decision to be made locally. But you're right. You point out the difficulty in that philosophy, in that I don't know what the number is in New Haven. I think in Bridgeport it's close to 75 to 80 cents that they spend on education comes from the state. And should we have an ability to make sure that money's being used as intended, there needs to be some oversight in that. How much you draw that line, I think, is difficult, and I honestly don't have that answer.
And I guess aside from how they spend their money, just maybe how they run their schools, should that be entirely up to an elected board, or should should we? I know that was thrown out in Bridgeport, but which kind of board would you support in a turnaround school district? Appointed board?
Oh no, I think you have to have an elected board. I think what the governor and the mayor tried to do in Bridgeport was a huge mistake. What I talk about is, you mentioned Judge Rohrbach when he was in the state senate. One of the things we learned was that in the city of Hartford, I think you can retire and get your full pension benefits after working for the city for 15 years. So there were a number of instances where, say, a finance director, would retire, get his pension from the city of Hartford, and then get hired by another municipality. I think the state has to have an ability to say, some of these practices, if you want to choose to do them, we won't continue to fund. We do that actually in school construction. So, for example, there are requirements and thresholds. If you want to build, the biggest elementary school in the history of the country, we're not going to give you your full percentage for that. If you go over a certain square footage per person, you pay for that. And I think we need to look at some of that. If you want to pay for it, that's fine. But there are certain practices that financially we need to ensure are happening on the local level.
Can I ask you a political question?
Yeah. You look exasperated.
How would you rate, as the party's last nominee for the highest office in Connecticut, how would you rate Tom Foley's performance in helping build the Republican Party writ large? and how would you approach that as a nominee and governor? We had a Connecticut magazine cover that,
Right.
yeah, that
Yeah.
pointed out, I mean, not that it's a new topic, but.
I was afraid to read it. I got to be honest, I didn't read it because I looked at it. I said, I don't think I want to read this. What's that? Yeah, the elephant. Yeah.
You were quoted in it.
I still didn't read it. I'm sorry. I was just afraid. Look, I don't know that it was his responsibility to build the party. We need to do a better job, all of us. What was the second part of your question? I forgot. As governor. Well, okay. Sorry.
There's so much you can do with the legislator that has no members.
So here's what I did in 2010 with working with Larry Cafaro. We came together, put together a set of what we called common sense principles, sort of larger thematic principles, and then supplemented it with specific ideas as how to implement those themes. We got every single Republican running for the state Senate and the state House, be they incumbent or challenger, to sign that common sense commitment and those set of principles. I think having that type of message, and what I hope to do on August 13th as the party's nominee, is work as a team through the constitutional offices and the state Senate and state representative candidates, and hopefully even with congressional candidates, on having a unified message. But where I probably take some hits within my party is that I think we have philosophical differences within our tent. I think those should be things we should be proud of, because if you want to be a majority party, you're going to have to expand the people you have in the tent.
So how do you do that?
Leadership. Lead by example. Look, I think at the end of the day, if I keep my partisan Republican hat on, it's about jobs and the economy and how our state spends your money that we take. How much of it we take to run government and how government runs. I think other issues people are free to disagree upon. I've supported the death penalty. Andrew Rohrback was opposed to the death penalty. I don't care if two men get married. I think they have the right to do that. Others are opposed to that. I've supported a woman's right to choose because I think it's her body and government shouldn't tell her what to do with it. Others oppose that. But those are issues I don't think government can and should solve. And I think, but we can and should solve whether you can get to work on time, whether your kid's getting a quality education, and whether that kid who's born in Bridgeport has the same chance and opportunity as the kid born in Greenwich. That's what I think we can do. So I think that's how you change that party. I think, I've been the leader of a caucus that is split on issues like abortion, death penalty, gun restrictions. And I've never been a leader that says you have to do it this way. I've never, and I admit it's easier when you're in the minority, but you can ask any colleague I've ever served with, those that love me and those that don't love me. I've never asked a single member of our caucus or told a single member of our caucus how you have to vote. And I think that's leadership. I think that's strong leadership. I think that's the right way to lead. And I think as the leader of the party going to the election, I will do that. I do think, I see it in both parties. I think having one party in total control of government is bad. I saw that when the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate and George Bush was president. They spent just as much as Democrats did, from my viewpoint, maybe even more. I see it here in Connecticut. You look at some of the areas where government works worst. Bridgeport, for example. Now, I'm not blaming Democrats for winning all the seats, but there's no viable alternative party. So you see, the Working Families Party actually is probably becoming as much of a challenge to the Democrats as the Republicans are. So I think you have to have two-party system, maybe more, for government really to work better for the people. And I think you do that by leadership.
The Dems have been a lock on Bridgeport for a long, long time. How come the Republicans are not able to break that law?
You know, I think it's in part the message and in part the messenger. I'd have to look at who the last politician who won the city of Bridgeport is. I know my dad won it a couple of times running for Congress, lost it more than he won it. So that goes back to the 80s, 70s and 80s. So it's been a long time. Mary Moran was the last Republican elected mayor. That goes back a long time as well. I mean, it starts by showing up. I mean, you mentioned the snippet on the gun control. That was, a meeting of about 35 to 40 people who were part of the Quiet Corner Tea Party Patriots. Every single person in the room disagreed with my vote on 1160. A lot of people were angry about it. I respect that. But the only way you can understand it is by sitting down with them and meeting. And I'm pretty confident that when I left, I didn't change anybody's mind in voting for me, although one person told me they were voting for me, but I had his vote going in. And that was over motorcycle helmet law, unrelated to anything. But I think almost everybody was appreciative and respected the fact that I showed up, I spent 2.5 hours, listened to them and answered their questions directly, even though they didn't like a lot of my answers. And I think as a Republican candidate for governor, I'm not going to just campaign in Republican towns. First of all, I'd lose. There's not enough of them. But I'm going to campaign all over the state, and I'm going to roll up my sleeves, and I'll show up in Bridgeport, and I'll show up in New Haven.
Well, it can't get worse than the Quiet Corner Tea Party Patriots.
To that end, Mr. Foley he's launched or not launched or put seed money behind CPI, which seems to be trying to stake out some policy positions on the city's urban policy report.
Right.
That's out. How do you counter that? Or do you counter that?
Well, I mean, I don't need a policy institute to give me ideas on how to grow the economy in New Haven or Bridgeport. So I don't think I need to counter that. But I think, as governor, you call up Tony Harp and you call up Bill Finch and you sit down with them and you try to work on where you can find common ground on what's best for their cities. And you do that everywhere. I mean, it's not just Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford. People in places like, New Britain and Torrington and Bristol, the quote-unquote smaller cities, are also struggling in Connecticut.
I know you've answered this on the gun control issue and that hypothetical question. I'm not sure how broad the question was. If people wanted to repeal the law as it stands now, that you said it was passed by the legislature, that you consider that.
Right.
You also could have said, there is a policy that as governor you can veto those things.
Right.
So both things are part of the legislative agenda or your options.
Right.
I don't know, why did you not say that you would?
I mean, I'm going to make the same mistake I made then. Look, I stand by my vote. I stand by the law, and I wouldn't have changed it. Look, I'm also open on any bill that passes, any law that passes. If people are going to look at its effectiveness, have people complied with the law, or important issues that you need to continue to look at. What I was asked, that specific question, there were a lot of questions leading up to it and after it that were feeding into it that, not surprisingly weren't on the Democrat blast, was if the Republicans won the House and the Senate and they were to put a repeal on your desk, would you sign it? And my answer was that I would defer, give great deference to the legislature. So let's look at that political reality. If Republicans control the House and the Senate, as the Republican governor, I'm going to need them to get through my budget, my proposals on, social services reform.
Bacon because pigs would be flying through the
Well,
air.
but there's always a balance, and so my point is, as governor, my focus is going to be on balancing the budget, getting our long-term obligations under control, and getting our economy growing. That is priority number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If the legislature has different priorities, then as an equal branch of government, they're going to say, Governor, you have your priorities, we have our priorities, we need to sit down. And so we will. And that really is what I meant by that. I could have answered it by saying, I'll never get to that point because I'll sit down and we'll work something out. But the reality is, my priority, and I said this at the meeting, I'm not going to offer a bill to repeal 1160. My priority is not going to be to focus on 1160. My priority is going to be on what I said, balancing our budget, getting our long-term debt under control, and growing jobs.
But basically, if you're backed into a corner and you can't get your budget, you can't balance the budget the way you want to, and it's,
There are always, negotiations between the legislative branch and the governor's office. There have been forever.
Specific to that bill, though, you talked about people not complying, and in my head, I've got this nightmare scenario of at some point, you see all kinds of crazy shit happening. Las Vegas thing, whatever. People with very strong feelings and mental illness, I think. And so you have thousands of guns, right, that are out there that haven't been registered that we know are out there. And we had an incident, I think, where someone shot a squirrel or something, not with his AR-15, with another gun, and they show up and he has these illegal guns, and
Right.
but maybe really all he's guilty of is shooting a squirrel and not
Right.
complying with the new law. How do what's the way forward in terms of easing our way into, unless you think we shouldn't, into enforcement of that, grace periods, and diffusing potentially bad situations because of this standoff?
Well, I think what you don't do is you don't have people knocking on doors saying, we've checked our records, you bought this at Hoffman's and you haven't registered it. I just think you have to state right up front that's not going to happen, because there is a fear by some people that would happen. And that, I think, puts people in law enforcement at risk. So I don't think you can do that. I was in favor of and would still be in favor of some period of amnesty. I've had people come to me privately and say, I know it's my fault, but I didn't even know.
What do they do by the deadline now? What do I do?
Yeah, and so, I told them, here's what you have to do, and they did it. Now, an amnesty period is not perfect, because there are people who did comply with the law, who chose not to register, who complied with the law by perhaps selling or giving away or destroying, their weapon. And so if I was one of those people, I'd say, hey, wait a minute, that's not fair to me. But we're not living in a perfect world. So the one thing I think is unfair is that all kinds of different sides of this issue have thrown out numbers of how many people haven't complied or registered. And I don't think anybody has any real idea of what that is. And that's probably a good thing, because that means that there isn't somebody in state government who's keeping a documented list of everybody and every gun they have, and their location. So I think we ought to talk about an amnesty. When we have tax amnesty, we have, corporate filing, all these amnesties.
Bring your library book back and you bring your
Yeah. So, so I think that would help diffuse the situation. Give people who wanted to but didn't, and maybe some people who won't fear that it's going to lead to confiscation.
How do you tackle affordable housing?
Well, I think
He's from Fairfield County. What's that?
that's a great question, and I guess I think there are three categories of housing that we fail in Connecticut. One is what I would call workforce housing, which I guess is maybe a better way of saying something that's affordable in Stamford is very different than what's affordable in New London. But when your firemen, police officers, and teachers, can't afford to buy a home in the community they serve, you've got a problem.
And journalists.
And journalists,
We'll
yeah.
always forget the
Yeah, well,
journalists.
you're right. I apologize. There's a lot of people. So that workforce housing, affordable housing, and then the third category, is something that is called supportive housing, which is how you would end homelessness. And actually, you asked where Governor Malloy has done well. I think actually Governor Malloy has done a very good job of making investments in supportive housing and affordable housing. You have to provide incentives. You need a public-private partnership. When you look at what people do with land, the best profit margin is in housing, and if you're requiring a certain percentage to be affordable, that reduces their profits. So you have to make sure that it works for the private developer and encourage it to happen on certain areas. I've been a critic of what people call the affordable housing law, which is 8-30G, because it just hasn't worked. What I've tried to say in the communities I represent is that if you don't like the law, and there's a reason not to like it, you need to be proactive. The law was designed to create more affordable housing. What it does, though, is it gives the tool to the developer to build the affordable housing because the communities are unwilling to do it. Communities need to step up. I just forgot the name of the plan that we had initiated under Governor Rell, but we need incentive zones close to transportation lines, whether it's bus stops or rail lines, and provide incentives for towns to have affordable housing built in those zones. What could it be? It could be extra money for ECS. It could be things like that. The state never really followed through on that because of tough budget years and economic times. Ultimately, that may help some of your transportation issues as well. I mean, for people who are going to work in Stamford, it's unaffordable for many to live in Stamford. So they'll live in Stratford, they'll live in Milford, they'll live in, up in the valley, and they'll be in a car for 45 minutes to an hour trying to get to work.
Anybody have anything else? I know your goal was to be here 3 or 4 hours, right?
That's right.
Was there anything you would do about the pilot program, which is the state is violating the law by not paying cities the amount that they're meant to?
Which pilot? You mean the payment in lieu of taxes?
Yeah. Like New Haven is 45%, something like that, profit, and it doesn't get 100% of the pilot that it's due. I don't know, Mary would know.
Well, what I wouldn't do is the reverse pilot that Speaker Sharkey's talked about. I guess it's easier to say what I wouldn't do because, look, I understand the lack of taxable property in a place like Bridgeport, for example. I know Bridgeport better than I do New Haven. I went to Yale, but all I did was go to pizza places. So
That's why Yale's
like
New Haven's going down the tubes.
well, because the pizza places are.
You didn't go to the Union League Cafe.
But no, I didn't. But look, the relationship that Mayor DeStefano and President Levin forged started, as one of two people sort of locking horns and ended kind of as two people locking arms. And I think they've come to a pretty good understanding of how New Haven needs Yale and Yale needs New Haven. So, I mean, my hometown is Fairfield, Connecticut. I was born and raised there. Fairfield, Connecticut is one of the few communities in the state that's home to not one but two colleges, Sacred Heart University and Fairfield University. I understand that if pilot reimbursements to towns and cities related to colleges and universities gets reduced, my town might get less money. And the way it's worked now is you have one pie and the size of the slice changes. So when Yale bought 100 and whatever acres in West Haven at the Bayer Pharmaceutical, West Haven's slice of the pie got bigger, everybody else's slice got smaller. But at the end of the day, my community is, I believe, a lot better off for having those colleges and universities. I think New Haven is a lot better off having Yale than it is not having Yale.
We do better with the money.
I don't agree.
And the money.
Well, Yale and the money, but so
We're not asking Yale to leave.
so well, but I think I think part of the discussion is Yale imposes a burden and we ignore the benefit. There are burdens and benefits. I think the relationship that Yale and New Haven formed is a pretty good model. Now, one of the things that Speaker Sharkey wanted to do is talk about removing from the tax exempt status new housing built that wasn't related to the college and university. I'm okay with looking at that. But I think the system works pretty well. We just need to make sure that the level of funding is adequate.
Well, that was my question, is how do you make it?
I don't know that the current level of funding is unfair.
It's about 30%.
What's that?
It's about 30% now
Well,
of what they would have gotten if the property was
but
taxed.
right. So philosophically, what's the assumption? Here's what we would have gotten in property tax if what? If the Yale building wasn't there?
Right, if the hospital's not there, if the Yale building wasn't there.
Okay,
This
so-
was all in private.
So why is the private business going to move if Yale's not there? I mean, that's what we're missing. Bob Gennario, who's now a judge, who was Jody Rell's OPM secretary, who was a state senator from Norwalk, put in a bill on having a big box tax because there was a part of Route 1 in Norwalk that became Walmart, Home Depot, Sports Authority, and 2 or 3 others. Now, as a kid, I remember going down that road with my dad all the time, and there was nothing there. And so the way Bob looked at it is if we had housing and more retail shops, we could get more tax. These big boxes are costing us money. And what I say is, wait a minute, for 30 years you had nothing. And the only thing that could go there, or was willing to go there, or could afford to go there, was the big box.
How are they costing money?
Well, his argument was you were getting less from having Home Depot than you would with other development. So he wanted just a tax on big box stores. And so the idea that Yale buildings didn't exist, that's going to be filled with housing and manufacturing businesses and other businesses is, I think, a fantasy because the businesses are attracted.
But that wasn't his question.
No, but that's what Mary's point
No,
was.
I
Mary's
know,
point
but-
was, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what I'm saying is, the philosophy is, here's a Yale building, and here's a Alexion building. We can tax that, and we can't tax this. If we take this away, we're going to have 2 Alexion buildings. Guess what? If we take this away, you may not even have that.
We all understand that really well.
Yale's
Yeah.
not moving.
No, but
Yale's never gonna move.
Hold on. But the assumption is that the pilot is 100% of what this could get.
I
So
don't know if that's the assumption or
Well,
not.
it's about
That's what the-
77% of 100% because,
That's what the state law decided.
Right.
The city was worth, the property was worth to give to the city. Maybe that's worth 100,000 and the state
Right.
decided to give 70% of that.
Right.
The fact is, it is on the books as a state law.
well, and I right.
You've stated several times about how you want to
Right.
follow the law. So
well,
why aren't these places, these cities getting the money that they?
in effect, we change state law every time we give out pilot payments. So there's no, I don't think the cities and towns have any legal entitlement to that money. So every time we pass a budget, we're creating what the state law is vis-a-vis pilots. But let me just address your answer. Yale's not moving. They just did. They bought 107 to 110 acres in West
They didn't
Haven,
move.
not in New Haven.
Well,
No,
that's
but
because we're
hold on.
running out of
That's a huge deal, and we don't want Yale. We know Yale's going to continue to exist, but in what form? They've invested. One of my frustrations with the governor's investment in the new UConn hospital was that Yale is investing hundreds of millions of dollars in things, and they're doing it in the private sector. Why did we need a new state hospital to do some of these things? So, I mean, we want Yale to continue to grow and thrive, and you want it to happen in New Haven, not West Haven. So,
Well, we're running out of land now, too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
Sacred Heart just bought the Jewish Home for the Aged in Fairfield.
Yep.
Quinnipiac built 2 new campuses in the last dozen years or so because they have the land to do it. Where's Yale going to build in New Haven? I mean, the city isn't going to benefit by that because they're not going to get the full pilot from it. So they bought West Haven land. UNH bought land in Orange. They need the space.
yeah, they bought their business schools going right off the Merritt Parkway there.
So what about
So they need
Marty
the
Looney's
space to-
proposal, though, I guess, because he would guarantee a certain percentage.
Remind me of what his proposal was?
He wouldn't guarantee that, up to 70%.
Right.
It would be for towns with particularly high amounts of hospitals, colleges, state properties, so it's Hartford, New Haven.
Right.
You would get a higher percentage, maybe 50% of what, and it would be a set amount so that you always knew you were going to get that. It would be dropping from close to what it was, maybe 70 at some point, now
Right.
down to 32%.
No, I'm not opposed to looking at something like that. I don't think you can ever make a promise to a municipality that you're never going to get less money. And again, we put mandates on towns and cities that cost them a lot of money. So I think one of the ways we can relieve their budget constraints is by freeing up some of those mandates. In-school suspension is one. I represent the town of Easton. There's no commercial activity in Easton other than a couple of farms and one general store. It's 9,000 to 10,000 people. 3-acre zoning is most of the town. You really can't find it anywhere. But on their budget, a $50,000 to $70,000 mandate is a big deal. So. Again, I'm not opposed to looking at some of the changes to the pilots. I don't think under any budget iteration, whether it be our Republicans or Jody Rell's or Dan Malloy's or Marty Looney's, any budget has given less to places like Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven than Fairfield, Greenwich. I mean, clearly, we're going to always do more for the places that need more help. And the fact that, Bridgeport, Waterbury, other cities, New Haven, are homes to hospitals, and a place like Fairfield isn't, they need to have a reimbursement. But we have a hospital pilot payment for that. We don't for other things.
I was going to ask about regionalism, but I'm just really too hungry after 2 hours.
Yeah. I think there are two different philosophies on regionalism. Brendan Sharkey and I are pretty good friends. We went to high school together. We played on the high school soccer team together. That's kind of been well documented. He says that was better. That's good for me, but he's more powerful. His philosophy is more of mandating it and punishing towns for not engaging in it. Mine would be more of providing incentives for people to do it. A lot of the really
Again, the hook of state funding is that.
a lot of the really small communities have been working on this, but I think it comes to the affordable housing issue. Towns need to be held accountable first before we like a state solution. I mean, for example, my hometown, we have a purchasing director for the town side of the budget and a purchasing director for the Board of Education. The Board of Education is about 70% of the budget. Is it possible that we could have one purchasing director for the whole town? I bet you it is. Is it possible that Fairfield and Easton could do their purchasing together? I bet you it is. And the reality is smaller towns who are really squeezed, just like all towns are, but have been doing that. And I think if you provide incentives to do that, you'll get to where you need to go.
Anybody else?
So Mr. Walker, I guess, disagrees with you on the EITC. Is that true, or is it just a matter of degree? Or?
I thought he said he supported it, but didn't approve of the current system the way it is with the fraud. It's sort of what I said.
What is the fraud? I mean, that's what you said when it piggybacks on the.
A lot of the studies that have come, and there's one by the Federal Inspector General's office. There are people who receive an earned income tax credit who are not eligible. There are various reasons why, whether there's mistakes on intentional misrepresentations of income levels on returns, people who are not eligible using different Social Security numbers or the like.
So it's double fraud? I mean, you're ripping off the feds and then they're ripping off the.
Correct.
So isn't that a problem for Kevin Sullivan, not a problem with policy? Or?
No, the Connecticut earned income tax is linked directly to the federal earned income tax. So what we say, and it's for simplicity's sake.
It's the IRS problem.
Yeah, if you file for a federal EITC, fill out your form in Connecticut, and we give you 30% of what you get from the feds. if you delink that, then you make it a Kevin Sullivan policy, and I think Kevin Sullivan's done a pretty good job running DRS, so I think he could manage it.
I think you can find 75 million extra dollars in
I know a lot of people on my side were critical of that. I think the better criticism of the last minute budget quote unquote balancing was the fact that the governor didn't put in $51 million for Department of Correction retirees that Kevin Lembo has said we have to have, and the Correction Officers Union has said we have to have, and the numbers tell you we have to have it, and we're going to end up putting that money in there. I met with Kevin about it. He said that he actually had been looking at this for a while. It wasn't a last minute thing on his end. It was a last minute ask of, hey, we need to find more money. I think he probably can. My only concern would be the methods which are used to get it. I've had small business owners tell me that they feel like they're getting hit by, a ton of bricks when DRS comes after them in certain instances, more threatening, and with that, you want people to pay the taxes they owe. I haven't seen evidence of it, but I've had business owners tell me that sometimes they feel that DRS is strong-arming and threatening. So
is that what they do now?
no, I don't know.
What is Kevin?
No, I'm not saying that.
No.
I haven't seen his plan as to how he would get it, but I'm not as hypercritical of their ability to get that as some others have been.
But you have confidence in his ability to get it.
I think he's done a pretty good job. I've called him out on the rebate cards, and that was kind of a fiasco and a disaster, I think. But I think, by all accounts, Kevin's done a pretty good job.
Great, I appreciate you.
Yeah,
we
thanks
all
for all your
appreciate
time. I
spending
really
so much
appreciate it,
time
and
with us. Yeah.
thank you for all your attention,
Well, the
too.
traffic is appreciating it. I just timed the truck, it took a minute and a half to get
This
from
looks
one
like
end to the other.
Fairfield.
I know,
Going the
well,
other way, it took 6 seconds.
I guess I'm going to have to find out if Jody's ever gone to Louis' lunch or something. We'll have to go the other direction.
You never went there either?
What's that?
You go to
Oh,
Louis'
have you seen me? I've gone there too much. I haven't asked how their business is doing with Shake Shack and all the other things that have moved into New Haven yet. But
You may not want to Shake Shack.
what's that?
Just
They had a
as
All the
hazmat
expensive
team.
fast food?
Oh, did they really?
Yeah.
That's not a good sign.
Uh-oh.
Hazmat team.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
not a good sign at all.
That's okay.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Mary, thank you.
Hi.
Nice to see you too. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Appreciate it.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Super nice to see you
You
again.
too,
Thanks.
thank you.
I think I met you.
We'll be in touch, I'm
Nice
sure.
to meet you.
I hope so. It'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, you were at,
Thank you for all your time. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your time. Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. I apologize. This is my first time doing it. I tend to sit down with some
Oh, okay.
other papers down the line because they're more regionally based for my district, but I should have come up here a while ago.
God, I can't remember where we were at. I am getting old. I can't remember.
Well, I'm just as
Anyway.
bad because I don't remember anything. But it is nice to see you
It's nice
again.
seeing you. Okay, take care.
Bye, it was great to see you. Take care.
So are you looking for a place to live? Or are you
No,
getting
no,
out
it's
of
easy,
town?
but-
Getting out of town. You're not going that way, are you? You going
What's
to-
that?
Are you going to Fairfield?
Yeah, supposed to, but really 115.
That's pretty much. That's
Um,
city limits.
Yeah, what is that, I wonder?
I don't know. There's some
Accident,
accident
maybe?
someplace.
Probably. Took the back roads up to the Merritt Parkway too. Oh, he is.